we're going to talk about encoding, which is like the most boring thing that you can possibly talk about. And the only reason I chose this guy to talk about encoding is because he makes it damn entertaining. And it is always a frequently asked question at the Stump the Gurus thing, because nobody really gets it. But he gets it. And after about 25 minutes, you will get it. So please welcome from Keycode Media, a Final Cut Pro guru and not an Avid guy, right?
Avid? I love Avid.
Yeah, I know.
Excellent.
We all do. Please welcome Michael Kammes.
Thank you, everyone. First and foremost, I want you all to embarrass a friend of mine who's actually on the, he's actually a Final Cut Pro guru in Chicago. So Mr. Red Flash Frame over here, David Salick. So everyone. It's not often that I get to thank one of my mentors, so thank you, David, for being here. I appreciate it. Encoding, yes, it is boring. It is completely boring. But in the past 10 years, it's probably one of the biggest arenas that you can actually make money in post, because no one knows how the hell to do it. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about are the 4 big areas in post where you actually need encoding. Okay, I'm not going to go over recipes, all right? You can Google that. But I'm going to go over the main places where you can use encoding and where you can then charge for that. So first of all, let's go back in time a little bit. Circa 2000, right? Back in 2000, encoding fell in one place, right there, right? Everything was tape-based. You were lucky if you got a mini DV, but most productions were still shooting beta. You'd capture into your Avid or Final Cut, you'd do your edit. Everything was in the system, but the only encoding you had to do was a DVD, right? And there was the role of the compressionist, who had a shelf life of about 5 or 6 years. A compressionist was someone who sat around all day, took the finished output of the movie, encoded it with a sonic sonorist, which is one of the high-end DVD encoding solutions, and that's all they did all day. And what they did was make sure that when there's a fast Vin Diesel action sequence, right, that the bit rate was jacked up so you could see all the motion. And when it was a talking head, you could lower the bit rate down. They made selective choices like that, and they balanced kind of art and science. And I think over the past 10 or 12 years, we've gotten off of that. We've gotten to the, oh, there's a preset and compressor. Oh, I can download this. Oh, I saw that Philip Hodgetts had this great recipe book, and I'm just going to use that. And I think there's something we have to look into now, which is melding the art and science back together. So here's a couple areas where we can actually do this. So here's a more modern timeline. We now have editorial, where we start editing. We have the review and approve process, right? Because now all the producers aren't in LA all the time. A lot of times they're overseas or across the country, and they have to see exactly what you're doing. And they don't want to wait for you to FedEx a tape. Okay, so you have to get them a digital copy online for them to see instantaneously, and maybe they want to see it on their iPhone. So now that's another format you have to create. We also have post audio. We now have to make copies for the Foley walkers, or the sound editors, or the mixers. So now we're talking window burns. Now we're talking anti-piracy stuff. So now we're talking bugs and watermarks. And then we have, of course, the deliverables, which is DVD, Blu-ray, online, or mobile. So first, let's talk about what I think most of you are going to be dealing with on a daily basis, and that's the pre-editorial, or I call them pre-encodes. That's where we deal with those evil H.264, those even more evil red files, those horrible AVC HD and AVC intra files that I hate, and I hope you hate too. So what we need to create is you'll notice I have it right before editorial, because editorial is usually defined as when the assistant editor comes in and organizes things for the editor. All right? There's usually, it may be ingesting, but the role really doesn't include doing the encode or getting these camera formats, these acquisition formats, into an editable way. So there's a couple different ways to do that. First off, we can use hardware. All right, Dean has a piece of gear here called the Atmos Ninja, and that does something that is right up this alley, which is taking the signal from the camera and skipping that whole H.264 in the back end, skipping that whole red format, skipping that XD-Cam and P2, and taking the signal out of the camera into a recorder that will record ProRes. And since you guys are all using Final Cut, you know ProRes is the codec du jour, and that's the kind of the codec you want to use. A lot easier to use in post than some of these other formats. Some other gear, AJA. AJA makes the Key Pro or Key Pro Mini. You guys, anyone heard of that? A few of you? Okay. Same concept as the Atmos. Does ProRes, a few more bells and whistles. Very cool device. We have a product called the CinderDeck, which actually looks like a 7-inch viewfinder. You stick it on your camera, and it can record uncompressed 2K ProRes, DNX HD, amongst others. So that's a great intermediary. There's also a product called Nano Flash by Convergent Design. And again, that's the same concept. It's a box that you take the output of your camera and record into a codec that is best to edit with instead of the camera native. There's also software. All of you obviously have Compressor, and although Compressor is very powerful, in terms of encoding, it's not the best quality and it's not going to be the fastest one out there, but it's free, so usually it jumps to the top of the list. We also have a company called Telestream, who you may have heard me mention before. They make a product called Episode, and I'm a big fan of their encoding solutions, and I'd highly recommend you go to telestream.net. They have a bunch of hardware and software encoding solutions. And then the NLE, your editor. Your editor can actually generate these dailies for you. Here's a good workflow, and I think Michael Kulik will appreciate this. Red, for example, right? Red is horrible to deal with. You can't edit with it. But if you put it in your Avid and throw a red rocket card in there, you can then export your DNX HD out of Avid, and now you have your DNX HD done in real time, if not faster, from your red file using your editing system. So you can use it to actually to create those files. This is where you might want to get your pens out. This is a good codec and bad codec. Okay, codecs that are bad. All right. On the low end, we're XDCAM, HD, and EX. And why I say on the low end is because computers are getting to the point now. God, I sound like an old man. Computers are getting to the point now where you can actually edit with these with somewhat decent success. But then we get into color space issues, where XDCAM and XDCAM HD and XDCAM EX don't have the full color gamut. They're not 444, and they deal with long gaps, so the signal will degrade as you go through different renders and different encodes. So if you can move off of that, your system is going to go a heck of a lot quicker. AVC Intra and HD, any flavors of those look spectacular. I'm not going to deny that in the least. But in post, unless you have a brand new computer, they're going to bog your system down, and many systems will not play them natively. Obviously, H.264, yes, the glass on a 5D or 7D is fantastic, but as someone brought up just a few minutes ago, trying to edit that natively isn't going to fly. And of course, R3D. R3D, as much as people would like to say you can edit them natively, it's a chore, and it makes the editorial process less than pleasant. So what's best in post? Well, there's two main ones. There's DNX HD, which is Avid's HD codec. Okay, I liken it to a high-quality MP3 of uncompressed video. Okay, so you know, an MP3 sounds good, but it's not as big as a huge WAV file. DNX HD and ProRes are basically the same concept. They're a compressed version, but virtually lossless to the eye. In fact, you can run it through scopes, and you don't see any discernible difference. Now, we are coming again to a point in time where this may not all be completely accurate. And what I mean by that is Avid has something called AMA, Avid Media Access, which allows you to access your QuickTime files. So basically anything you click and can launch on your desktop, you now can use in the Avid, which is great. So when you get some of these files like H.264, you can put those in the timeline and actually try and use them. However, since we're still dealing with a QuickTime codec, it's difficult. Final Cut or Final Cut 10, we know that we should be able to play stuff natively in the timeline. But again, until we see it, we won't know. So some of these codecs may be easier to deal with in the next 6 months or a year, but for right now, they're very difficult to deal with. A good rule of thumb, and it's kind of a trade-off. Where do you want to spend your time? Do you want to spend your time, do you want to lose money on storage, or do you want to lose it on time? Because these camera acquisition codecs take up a little amount of drive space, but they give you longer render times. And the reverse is true. The best in post codecs take up more space, but have less render time. So I guess lesser of two evils. Other good rule of thumb is avoid long gap and interframe codecs. If you have any questions, look it up on Wikipedia, it will tell you. And also, when you're developing any kind of edit system, I don't know how many calls I get from people who say, I want to buy this product. Step back, what are you shooting with? Well, why is that important? Well, determining what you shoot with will determine what's the editing system you use and what kind of storage you need. So before you start editing, determine what camera you're going to shoot with and find the best solution for that. Maybe even choose a different camera to make your life easier. Has anyone ever heard of the Alexa from Ari? Yeah, there we go. What does it record in? ProRes. That's awesome. You know, now you have a great piece of glass and you can edit with the file that comes directly off there. All right, so we're back to our timeline. Next we have review and approve. All right? What it used to be was that you had to make an edit and then do a layoff either to a DVD recorder or to a 3/4 inch tape or a beta tape or a VHS and then ship that either with a showrunner or ship it across country to a producer or director who would give their notes and then get it back, and it would be a several-day process in between cuts. As anyone here can attest to who edits, we don't have that time anymore. We need those notes instantaneously so the assistant editor can make the changes that night for the client to come in the next day. So what are they going to want to see? Well, they're going to want MPEG-2s, which are pretty common. I think all of you have probably generated MPEG-2s at one time or another. Or we have Blu-ray. Okay, Blu-ray really hasn't taken off as much as we would like. Right now, there's only 3 or 4 companies in the world that actually have Blu-ray authoring software. It really hasn't taken off very well, but there will be that occasional producer or director who says, well, I have a Blu-ray player at home and I would like a Blu-ray disc. Okay, so what you should probably be looking into is H.264 and MPEG-2. And now I'm going to give you a quick tip. If you're generating a Blu-ray DVD, go MPEG-2. It will be easier to encode, easier to find a solution that will do it, and if you do it at a high enough bit rate, the client will never know the difference. Typically, you only use H.264 when you need to conserve space on a disk. If you're trying to put a Lord of the Rings on a disk, MPEG-2 isn't going to fit, but an H.264 will. You may have heard of the Microsoft VC1. No one uses it. Don't worry about it. Hey, I call it like I see it, you know? Come on. You want to get files up to the web. You know, there's the antiquated FTP transport where you upload it to a website, hope it doesn't bomb out, and then let them download it, hopefully it won't bomb out, and they can review that. So that practice is still in play, and that's when you'll be generating usually H.264s as well, sometimes MPEG-4s, but mainly H.264s. And then of course the iPhone and iPad, those are taking H.264 as well. So as you can see, H.264 is pretty prominent. So I know there's a lot of confusion with codecs and what should I use, but if you're really going to bone up on one codec family, I think H.264 would be something that you may want to spend a lot of time on Wikipedia looking up. Other extras, they may want a watermark, right? Do you guys remember, not X-Men, Wolverine? Remember Wolverine came out a couple years ago? You guys know what happened to that film? You guys remember what happened, right? It got leaked a year before it was supposed to go be in theaters. It got leaked minus effects. And because of that, well, I mean, the movie sucked. But aside from that, they lost a lot of money because people already saw it. Now, if that had been watermarked with maybe Assistant Editor Bob on there, it probably wouldn't have leaked because it would have been tracked back to Bob immediately. So a lot of times now we have to put watermarks and bugs on things. In fact, I know some companies that actually, they call it rotoscoping, and they will actually black out a majority of the screen just so you can see pacing, just so that they don't want to get nailed in it getting out. So you may have to put a watermark or a bug or a streamer on the bottom. And timecode window burns. As you probably know with Final Cut, you can drop a timecode window burn on there. On Avid, you can drop a real-time timecode window burn, so that may be needed as well.